Hello everybody, welcome back to another video. Today I want to talk a bit about the free agency period and the free agency pool in the Overwatch League right now. Because there's a lot of players in the free agency pool right now who are just players from last season who are on rosters. And I want to talk about some of them, kind of throw out some ideas or some potential landing spots for some of these players. I am specifically going to talk about players that are not rumored players, that there are not rumors that I am aware of relating to these players. This is as of January 4th when I am recording this video. So if there is a rumor about these players that I don't know about, my apologies. I am consulting the list that can be found on Wikipedia. I will link to it in the description. It is a list of rumors. You can check it out if you want to see some potential rumors and stuff, players that are rumored to be on different teams. I'm not going to talk about those. I'm talking specifically about players who are not rumored to be going to anybody at the moment, or at least not ones that I know about. So we're going to jump in. We're going to talk about some of them. I have a bunch of players on here that I'm just going to kind of off the cuff talk about, and we can kind of go through it. And I'm going to do this by a team-by-team basis, I think, is the way I'm going to do this. If there's a player I don't mention that you want to hear more about, or that you have an interesting potential landing spot for, leave that in the comments down below. And like I said, if it is a player that has a rumor around them, check the link to the Wikipedia page in the description. But without further ado, let's jump in. Let's talk about an interesting team, one of the teams that I've been kind of really intrigued by their current off-season so far. That is the Houston Outlaws. They have made a lot of changes to their roster, going very, very, very heavy in a pretty much full Korean roster. Actually, it is a full Korean roster. And I imagine it is going to remain a full Korean roster for the foreseeable future. With players like Pelican, Fearless, Shu, Happy. They have a lot of really talented Korean veteran players. They want to make a championship roster, and I'm kind of viewing what this roster is and looking at kind of their potential, and I think that this is a team that I want to see go for a very big name brand, name value type of look with this roster. And I think you have to kind of look about the types of things that they have, things they don't have, whatever. I think this is a perfect landing spot for a player like Fury, a veteran off-tank who can play heroes that are opposite those of Fearless, right? Fearless is a Winston player. Fearless is a Reinhardt player. Those are the heroes he is most known for. He is not the most well-rounded. That was not what he did last season. What he did last season was came in for the Dallas Fuel when they needed someone to be able to play the Winston or the Reinhardt full time. But the majority of the season, they had Hanbin. So to me, this is a very good spot for a player like Fury. I think those are two guys who aren't going to have that kind of issue in terms of having like an ego in check. They're veteran guys. They've been around a long time. They know what the other is. They know what they are. They know what their value to the team is. Now, I don't believe Fury has retired as far as I'm aware. I think he's still active, but maybe I'm incorrect. But my understanding is that he is still active and is looking for a team. And I think this is a really good potential landing spot for him. I really like what Fury did this past season. I thought he had a very good year. I thought he was underrated. And I think he would be a really good fit on this Outlaws roster that has some needs. I think they need another hit scan player, obviously, because they don't have one right now. There's some other rumors about them, but the pool of free agents is a little weird. But I really love Fury potentially joining the Outlaws, so that's what I'm going to throw out. Speaking of the Outlaws, though, and Fearless and his old team, the Dallas Fuel, they have a pretty solid roster at the moment. They have 5 players announced. They have 2 supports. They have 2 DPS. They have a tank. So I know there's some questions about what do they potentially do going forward. What type of additions do they make? A player that I think would be really interesting to see join the Dallas Fuel is Flora. Of course, formerly with the New York Excelsior. I think Flora would be a very interesting addition because I think he provides you with kind of what you need, which is you need another hit scan player. Edison is a solid hit scan player. Not Yaki. Sparkle is not known for his hit scan play. It's not his bread and butter. It's not his forte. It's not really what he is most known for. And so I think realistically, that would be a good fit for Flora, because he does play the Widow, the Ashe, the Sojourn, and he can play the Tracer, and I think he would be the best Tracer on this roster as well. I think he provides you some really nice flexibility in that DPS line that gets you kind of what you need as a whole unit, and I think that's one of the things why I think Flora would just be a good fit here. I think Flora was one of the best parts of New York last season. I think most people would agree with that. He looked very, very good for the majority of the season. But there is a lot of things that I think he brings to this team that would allow them to kind of have much greater success in those double hit scan metas, and even if they wanted to run his Tracer over something like Sparkle and Tracer. Another potentially interesting move for the Dallas Fuel would be to bring in someone like Violet. At the moment, they only have the MCD and Bliss as their supports. That is the only two support players they have. Everything points to Violet no longer being on the San Francisco Shock. I think he could be a good addition here. You know he can play Lucio at a high level. You know he can play Zen at a high level. So in a double flex support meta, you know you have two good flex supports between him and MCD. Bliss is a bit of a question mark for some people. He is very talented, and coming from a very good contenders team, but a lot of people don't think that Bliss is at the high end of someone like Vindime or even what Chio was for them last season. Violet could be a good player to bring in as kind of a second option there in that flex support role. So if you need a double flex support, you have a double flex support. You have someone that can play, Ana or Zen alongside MCD, and you feel confident about it. And if Bliss doesn't really play all that well, if that is an issue that happens, not saying it will or I expect it to, just potentially that is an option. You can bring in Violet to be that secondary Lucio player just for safety, and that's something that I think could be a decent move for the Dallas Fuel. I also want to throw one other move out. It's a bit of a weird one, I think. It's a bit of an odd one, but I think it would be interesting to see this move happen with this Dallas Fuel roster. I'm of the opinion now, and I talked about it a bit with Fury to Houston potentially, I think that you need two tanks in the Overwatch League. I think that there's very few tanks that can play the entire tank roster to its entirety. And I think the reality is, as the tank roster expands, it's going to become more and more and more unlikely that tank players are able to play every single tank at a high level. And so I think that the reality is we're going to see a shift to more and more teams running two tanks. It was what we saw last season. A lot of teams seemed hesitant to do it at times, but I think two tanks is your option. I would not be surprised if the Dallas Fuel brought in Takoyaki, formerly of the Hangzhou Spark. Rush said in an interview a couple years ago that he thinks Takoyaki is one of the best tank players in the world when he signed with Hangzhou, and then Hangzhou didn't really play him that much. He didn't do a whole lot. There are other tank players that could join this team, other main tank players. Someone like Kellen, who we'll talk about a little bit later, could be one of the guys that does that. There's rumors around Mag, but he's an example. There are other players who could join. But history has shown that to some degree, there's a big push by Rush to get some of his guys, some of his guys he's worked with in contenders in the past, onto his team. I think that him saying Takoyaki was that good, to me screams he would like to give Takoyaki a chance on this roster if it was a possibility. And so I think that is just a name to look out for potentially for the Dallas Fuel. I don't necessarily think it's going to happen, but if you only need him to play your Ryan and your Winston, and you have Hanbin to play a lot of the other stuff, I think Takoyaki is a solid shout to potentially just be there as that kind of emergency blanket in the event that you absolutely need him for some of the other roles that you have, and some of those other heroes that you would need. But let's talk about another team, another Korean roster while we're at it. Let's talk about the Seoul Infernal, the newest Overwatch League team. Technically, kind of. It's just the Philadelphia Fusion. There's a couple of rumors around this team as well, potential players I might add, but I want to throw out a name that is not rumored currently to join this team or any team as far as I'm aware, but someone who has history with the organization who I think could be an interesting shout potentially to join this roster, and that is Krillin. Obviously, most recently he played with the Washington Justice, and before that he played with the London Spitfire, but he played with T1 in between his stints with the Spitfire and the Justice in the 2021 season of Contenders, or multiple seasons, I guess. And he had a very good year this past year in the Overwatch League. The Soul Infernal organization, formerly the Philadelphia Fusion, have had a very, very, very close connection with their academy team at T1. They almost always pull players from T1, and so I think it's very possible that we see them pull players from previous iterations of T1 wherever possible, and I think that is why Krillin could potentially join this team. That's also why I think there is a very good chance, or at least a possibility, that they go after Bernard, who was with Fusion University back in the day, many, many years ago now at this point in time, but a player who was at one point in time on the Fusion University roster. He got traded to London Spitfire as a part of the trade that sent Fury to Philadelphia. Then, of course, he was with London for that year. Then he spent 2 years with Hangzhou. He's been a very, very consistent player, and I think he is a very good fit for this roster. I think he's a very solid player. He's a veteran presence. He's going to give you a lot of consistent play. I think he's one of the best pieces from the kind of scene over the past several years. I thought he was a very good off-tank over the past several years, and someone who I would very much enjoy seeing on this roster. I think there's a possibility they bring in other potential players from T1, someone like Cleston or Arpen are some guys who have been on T1. Unique was with T1 recently. He could be someone that they bring up as well. Even someone like Ding Kong if they want another DPS player. But to me, Cleston is a really interesting option at off-tank, but I would rather have Bernard, who I think has just shown more during his time in the Overwatch League. I think he's a really, really good player, and I think that Bernard would be an awesome addition to this roster, considering his history with the T1 organization, Fusion University, Philadelphia Fusion, all that stuff. I think he'd be an interesting addition, and I think he would be a really good place to build this team around. I think he would be a really good, solid piece as they move into Seoul for next season. I think he is a player they should target. One of the more interesting teams is the Seoul Dynasty. We don't know what they are. Same with the Shanghai Dragons. We don't know what to expect for their rosters. Obviously, we know Shanghai did bring Moon back as their head coach, so we know he is going to be their head coach. We don't really know anything beyond that. And then with the Seoul Dynasty, as far as I know, Toby is still the head coach. They haven't made any major coaching changes to my knowledge. Maybe they did, but I don't think they have. So if you look at this team and you kind of look at what the Dynasty and the Dragons are, there's a lot of potential players that they could bring in. I think the two teams are going to take different routes, if only because of the situation in the APAC region. I think that the Seoul Dynasty are more likely to rebuild in a very similar way to what they did last season. I think Prophet's going to return to the Seoul Dynasty personally. I don't think he's going to leave. I don't think there's a lot of places where he makes sense on a lot of other rosters. You look at a team like Houston, they need a hit scan player. They already have Pelican. The Shock of Proper. They don't need Prophet. You think about the Dallas Fuel of Sparkle. They don't need Prophet. Florida Mayhem of Checkmate. They don't need Prophet. So I think he's probably going to find himself on a team like Seoul again. Maybe Shanghai if that is what they go with. But I think that Shanghai's probably going to build a more... I think they're probably going to build a more budget roster. That's just a guess based on the fact that the organization that owns the Shanghai Dragons is... why can I not remember the name of NetEase? That's what it is. NetEase, right? So it's the type of thing where you have to understand that I think that the Seoul Dynasty are more likely to build rosters with some of those players that they've had in the past, or at least just going to kind of go for a more traditional, kind of star-studded Korean roster, which is a lot of what they've built in the past. So I think Profit will return to this roster. I think they're going to look for other good, solid players. This is the type of roster where someone like Kellen could show up again. Someone like Tuyu could show up again. I think there's a lot of interesting players to look at here for potentially kind of rounding out the roster. Maybe they bring a Fitz back. Maybe they bring an Iris back. It's more so the players they released were released because they didn't know what the potential future for those teams were, for those players were. Now there's a little bit more clarity to what those players are and what the status of the Overwatch League going forward is. So I think you look at this team in particular and you kind of consider they probably will go after some of the players they've had in the past, Fitz, Iris, maybe even someone like ATVI to kind of go into this roster. This to me is a very interesting one. It's hard to kind of deduce what they might be, but I figured I'd at least mention this team because I do think there are some good players out there that didn't join this team or didn't join a team yet in the offseason. And so I think that they're probably going to build a pretty solid roster. But I do think this is an interesting team to look at when it comes to some of that talent. Some free agents are also hard to kind of place. Like, I don't know what to expect out of Doha for a very similar reason why I think it's hard to get everybody kind of on teams, because I think flex DPS right now, there's just not a lot of openings for flex DPS, and a lot of teams don't want 2 flex DPS players. You really only need 1 flex DPS player, right? You think about like Pelican, you're not going to need another one. Proper, you don't really need another one, though if he's saying, but Proper is more of a hyper flex, so a little bit different. Checkmate, you don't really need a second one. And so, to me, Profit will find a spot. I think he'll be with the Seoul Dynasty. Maybe someone like Doha goes to Shanghai if that's the route they go. Alpha Yi, who knows? A lot of teams are up in the air at this point in time. We don't really know what they really are. But it's going to be interesting to kind of see where some of these players end up. There's also, of course, some Western rosters, some Western players. There's been some rumors, good, bad, up and down, regarding Dante I've seen. I think Dante would be an interesting fit on a team like Vancouver, maybe. Because he could play some tank alongside Punk if you need it, but he also could provide Tracer, he could provide Sombra, which I don't necessarily have very strong Tracer play or Sombra play on that team, though I guess Aspire's Tracer is really good, so I take that back. It's not a great fit because I don't think he fits necessarily with his hero pool. I think Dante would be an interesting addition also to Toronto based on the rumors around them. They're going to have 2 tank players already, so I think he would be more a DPS player. But I think he would also be kind of an interesting player on that team. So it's interesting. I do think there's a lot of potential landing spots. And we don't know yet what teams like New York or Washington are really going to look at. There's some rumors, not a lot of rumors about it. It's interesting because we heard all these reports about teams wanting to go Western. But there's not nearly that many Western rosters as we kind of thought there might be. He could also end up on a team like Vegas now with their roster being Western. It's interesting to kind of see. We don't know yet what to expect, but Dante to me is an interesting player as well, who could end up on a number of teams. He's just a very, very solid player, but where does he go in terms of how the actual situation has kind of gone down, the way that the free agency period is gone, who knows, but I just think he's an interesting player and someone I wanted to shout out because I hope he finds a spot, even if he ends up on the Gladiators, and that'd be pretty cool. I don't really know what the Gladiators' full plan is, but I think he'd be an interesting player just to have on that team. If for no other reason, then I think the Gladiators are a pretty nice roster, and I think Dante, I'd like to see Dante win a championship just because he's been around for so long, and I think he deserves it at this point. But, yeah, that's everything for this one. Like I said, there's a ton of free agents. I just kind of wanted to throw out a couple of them, a couple different teams, and, throw my thoughts out there. But let me know in the comments down below any other free agents that you think would be good fits on certain teams. I would love to hear from you about that. But that's going to be all for me for today. If you like this video and more like it in the future, consider liking and subscribing. And, yeah. Hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.